Konnichiwa.
Hola,
I'm James,
and I'm Janet.
and this is the Uttermost Podcast, the bridge between you and the ends of the earth. Our guest today moves in two worlds. He provides spiritual guidance as a pastor, helping people navigate life's challenges with wisdom and compassion. As an entrepreneur, he understands the principles of stewardship, strategic planning, and ethical leadership. These two worlds, although they seem very different, actually complement each other in powerful ways. Here to discuss his experience at the intersection of entrepreneurship and faith is our friend and brother, O.C. Ejiofor. It's so good to see you today, sir.
Yes, good to see you both too. It's really great to. I feel like I'm in Japan. This is
Yeah.
With
Like
the
you're
tatami
sitting
room.
in the tatami room right now, right?
Yeah.
amazing.
And first of all, just for all the folks listening, where are you from? Or where are you
Based.
based?
Sure, I'm based in sunny Essex. That is for people who aren't familiar with England, it is to the west of London. So we're not too far from London. We're in touching distance of London, but it is not London. It is Essex, and yeah, it's kind of a very flat land in terms of England. England, of course, is in the UK. The UK is part of Europe. So yes, that's where I am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And today, as James explained, we're talking about entrepreneurship and Christianity, right? And so, just to kind of dig a little bit into your background, if I'm not mistaken, your career is in education, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then you've done some stuff with your career in education and entrepreneurship. Do you mind sharing with us a little bit of a glimpse into that journey, what that's been like for you?
Yes, I don't mind. So I had been an educator, classroom educator since 2005. Um, I actually stumbled into the profession having come out of university studying sports science, which is not necessarily related. Um, but like everybody, you're looking for a job, etc. I tried to get into a specific area in terms of sports development, and I was unsuccessful. Went through all these parts of the interview process, but I then stumbled upon this job as an exam invigilator. That's what it said. They tricked me. It wasn't exam invigilator. It was classroom teaching assistant, right? So I ended up being back inside a classroom, and yeah, very quickly people were telling me that I should become a teacher. So I applied to become a teacher while I worked as a teaching assistant, and became a teacher, became a middle leader, became a senior leader. So I worked from 2005 to 2017. I then came out from being an assistant head teacher and took the plunge and started doing what I was doing, but writing invoices and chasing payments, etc. But I essentially moved into training staff and how to use technology. So I became a bit of a specialist in technology for education and how it can be used. Because one of the things that I found is when I went back into school, it's like nothing had changed. It was like stepping back in time. So I was quite passionate about how technology could be used to help that learning and teaching experience. So that ended up putting me in good stead while I was working in schools. But then, yes, I worked for myself, and then the pandemic hit, and I continued to work for myself, but I branched out into a few different things. So I tried, and this is the thing, you have to try different things, So I was I shifted my in-school training to online training. So actually, that was a blessing because it opened up doors for me to train colleagues in the US, in the Middle East, in different parts of the world, essentially, which was really useful to get a little bit of an insight into how education is done in different places. But I also started an entrepreneur training event called Edgeway Education, whereby I had different speakers. So one was an expert in finance, one was a business entrepreneur in terms of business strategy, one was a business entrepreneur in terms of he run a business and it was doing very, very well. And then I had, in fact, Sister Leanne Diaz to give advice on um, will planning and
Oh,
probate,
okay.
etc.
Yeah.
And then somebody giving advice on investments. So how to move your money and invest it. So I started that while I was doing that, and I was doing some other bit. I was doing lots of different things at the same time during the pandemic. Currently, I have a salaried job, working, doing what I was doing independently, but now just with a salary. So I work for an academy
Mm.
trust, but I'm still just kind of doing other bits here and there. So I teach
Yeah.
piano and just other bits. So yeah, that's a
Y-
bit that's a bit of a patch version of my work history, but that's more or less it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've always known you to be very entrepreneurial, and now when you're taking us back through the timeline of things, it's interesting because you kind of said that the pandemic was what kind of pushed you into a lot of the that phase in your life when you were working for yourself, right? But I knew you as very entrepreneurial even before then, because I know you through the church, right? So I got to know you through working with you in the youth department and things like that, and I just saw how entrepreneurial you were in ministry. And that might sound like an odd way to put it to some, right, who are listening, an entrepreneur in ministry, but in many ways it was that, right? You just had this way of approaching things where you saw there was a need, there was a space that needed filling, and what can we do about that, and
Sure.
I remember one year, I was working for the Bible school in the UPC GBNI and trying to get some classes fit in. And I had asked you to come in to teach a class that we had never had anyone teach before. Probably the concept was kind of like, what are you doing? And that class was called Apostolic Entrepreneurship. And it was this idea of Christianity and entrepreneurship, how they intersect, right? And I
Mm.
remember asking you to come in and teach that class because I saw you as someone who lived that out, right? Do you remember anything about that class? Maybe you could share some points with us.
I do, I do. I remember being very excited about the title
Yeah.
because I I don't think there should be any kind of divide. I think there's far too much biblical precedent for us to even separate it in the first place. Because when you look at the life of the Apostle Paul, when you look
Yes,
at the
Paul.
parable of the talents, when you look
Yeah.
at, the life of Joseph, when you look at just so many, you go on and on and on throughout the Bible, even to the point where Elisha is, given an issue by a widow who is saying, her husband was one of the prophets, he's now dead. I owe money. My son, they're going to take away my sons. His answer wasn't, "Here's money, pay your debts." It's like, let's start a business. So
Mm.
there's so many biblical examples that yes, I was very passionate about it. I remember making some kind of notes. I remember just delivering that class and teaching. I think to me, entrepreneurship isn't about the job.
Mm.
To me, it's a mindset. I
Yeah.
think an entrepreneur knows they take ownership,
Huh.
if that makes sense. It's not
Mhm.
somebody else's thing. It's not, you're not working for someone else's company. You are making sure that this, you're taking responsibility to make sure this
Yeah.
thing gets done. So even you reminded me about GPS that I started.
Yeah.
I say I started, but I built a website and I made a resource for a Bible study guide. And this was just to meet a need of the fact that the young people and the church members, studying the Bible with people seemed like such a big mountain. Like you have to study how to study the Bible with people, whereas that wasn't my prior experience. My prior experience was you kind of just share your testimony, you share the scriptures, and when people ask questions that you're not too sure about, you pray about it and you say, I don't have the answer now, but when we meet next time, I will
Mhm.
come back and I have, it was just kind of more free flowing. So what I did was I wrote down the way in which I would study the Bible with people that I met. So I had a method in my head. I'd learned some of it from a previous experience, but I'd made a booklet, put that booklet online, made it available for people to either buy a hard copy or download it for free.
Mm.
And I also made a street questionnaire because I noticed that certain people were struggling when it came to street evangelism.
Hmm.
I called it hiding behind a flyer, essentially. So they would have a flyer in their hand and almost
Yeah.
apologetically, like, you really don't have to take this from me.
So sorry. So sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm giving this to you. Please. No, I wouldn't take it if I'm exaggerating, but
Yeah,
you
yeah,
get the
yeah,
picture,
yeah.
sometimes. And look, I'm very much aware that not every personality is comfortable with that method of evangelism.
Mm.
It's not the only way, but what I wanted to do again, it's kind of seeing an issue, but thinking about how to solve it. I thought,
Yeah.
the amount of people that stop me in the street and just ask me questions so that I can give to a charity, or so that I can,
Mhm.
talking about saving whales and saving, all of these different causes about things that, yes, to some are very important, but to me, there's nothing more important than the salvation of a soul. So, I thought that would be a good way of helping people to have something, yes, from a psychological point of view, to hide behind.
Mhm.
Actually, this is not me. This is just a questionnaire that I have to fill out. So I'm just wondering if you have a few minutes to complete this questionnaire, and you go through the questions. Do you believe in God? Do you go to church, etc.?
Yeah.
But then you're having this natural conversation occur because you're asking these questions. So just
Right.
kind of putting those things together, putting them on a website, and whoever wants
Is
to use it can use it.
is this website still available?
It is, I believe so. Let me check even now. It's godspurposeforsouls.com.
Godspurposeforsouls.com.
Ooh, yes.
Mhm.
I like it.
I remember that. I remember being still in Bible college when at some youth event that I attended, you promoted that, and I thought that was really cool. Even yeah, that was
Yeah.
a few years ago, but yeah.
I think that's
Still,
cool. And
I've had it translated in Spanish and French as well. Some friends helped me to do that.
ooh, very nice.
Maybe we can get it translated into Japanese,
Japanese.
right?
That would be actually really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And I appreciated that you brought up the topic. Well, you brought up Paul, and you brought up these, biblical characters, because actually read a verse not too long ago where Paul, he's talking about, we could, you guys could give us money, and we wouldn't be wrong for receiving it, but we don't want to, because we have our own income. And if
Mm,
you read into the character of Paul as evangelist, missionary, however you want to talk, that part of his life, he goes on as he's a tent maker,
mhm,
and he's sharing the gospel, he's doing this thing, but he's also has this job as a tent maker to have income.
mm,
And it just shows us that we don't have to be afraid to you know have start businesses, be entrepreneurs, to desire to have some income. I think the idea is that if we desire those things, then we are, you know, ignoring the things of God, and not caring about. But it's all together,
Mhm.
right?
yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that viewpoint, because the reality is, you heard that old joke about the person that's drowning in the sea and praying, God, send help.
Hmm.
Uh, and a boat comes along, and the man says, "Oh, no, 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 I'm okay. God will save me." And then
Yeah.
another boat comes along and say, "Do you
Mm.
need help?" And he said, "No, no, no, God will save me." You know, but the guy drowns. He drowns, goes to heaven, and says, "Lord, why didn't you save me?" He said, "Well, I sent 3 boats." you know, and it's this idea of sometimes we're kind of, yes, we can preach the gospel and witness and evangelize and do what we need to do to share the gospel. But if Paul puts it very strongly, in terms of people who don't work, and people who don't look after their own household, it's
Yeah.
worse than an infidel. So the reality is we need to be wise and have balance to
Hmm.
Yeah.
ensure that actually, in the work that we're doing, we meet people as well.
Yeah.
So if you're working for yourself or you've got a job somewhere, you're going to be meeting people, and it doesn't stop the ministry.
Right.
Sometimes some people feel like it's either one or the other, but actually, if you're a human being around other human beings, that's a good thing. And
Mm.
this idea of, what do you have? Like the question that Elisha asked the widow, what do you have? He didn't know what she had. She had to say, I have one cruse of oil,
Hmm.
but that's all I have. And it's changing that mindset from this is all I have to that's enough.
Mm.
Because Elijah's mindset was that's enough. Her mindset was this is all I have. And sometimes we can look at ourselves like the parable of the talents, and we can kind of feel like, oh, whatever the excuse is, in that scripture it was, you're a man who reaps where he hasn't sowed, you gather where you haven't strawed. So I knew you were a hard man, so therefore I didn't do anything. So whatever that excuse is for us, we can look at our ability, we can look at what we can do, and we can say, I only have this. And we can make the mistake of looking at other people and saying, if only I had that, you
Yeah.
know, person with the one talent could say, oh, if only I had 5, or if only I had 10. But the one thing that you have, just like that cruse of oil, different perspective. You know what? This is enough. With God, this is enough.
Mm.
And God can help me multiply this gift that I have, this talent that I have, this skill that I have. And I can put this to work and allow God to do the multiplication. That's God's job to do the multiplication. It's our job to apply ourselves. So, yeah, I really am quite passionate about us um, thinking of ways that we can use what we have to do whatever we can.
Yeah.
You know,
And so, what are some ways that we can identify what we have? What are some ways that, like, how, what, in either, yeah, what are some ways we can identify? What are some ways in your life that you identified? This is what God has blessed me with, and how did you identify what things can, you know, bring in income?
yeah, it's an interesting question that, because sometimes we are not the best assessors of ourselves. In
Mm.
fact,
Mm,
quite often our self-assessment is way off. We need other people to help us with that. And people who are married are saying amen, because they know that their spouse helps them to know themselves very, very well.
yeah, yeah.
Um, whereas our view of ourselves, both to the positive and to the negative, can be off, and I've spoken with my wife. She's encouraged me many times with things in terms of, why don't you do this? And for me, my mind is thinking, oh, I can do it. So for example, I kind of said almost off the cuff, yeah, I teach piano as well as other things. Now, at one stage, I wasn't teaching piano to anybody. And I think people might be able to relate to this point where you have a skill
Mm.
and you feel your skill isn't really good enough
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
to be of any kind of value to anybody else, especially not of any monetary value to anybody else. And then you think to yourself, well, I don't know anybody who would want to pay for that. And then you think to yourself, well, I haven't got the time. And you've got all of these barriers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And the reality is, what I've realized is, as well as identifying that, okay, this is a thing, it's realizing the value of that. It's like saying, the person with the one talent saying, do you know what, actually, there is a bank that I could put this in where I could get some interest,
Mm.
even though it's one talent. That transfers into, okay, I can knit, or I can sew, or I can
Mm.
cook, whatever the skill is.
Yeah.
And thinking to yourself, do you know what, actually, there are people who need X, or there are people who need Y. Um, Let me try and think about a way of packaging what I do know.
Mhm.
So it's not about what I don't know. So for
Mm-hmm.
me, I don't teach classical. I don't teach to read by school, because I read score like a 4-year-old reads a book, right? So it's very slow, it's very muddled, and so I wouldn't think to teach anybody reading music.
Hmm.
So then I had to be clear about that. I had to say, right, okay, if I'm going to teach music, it has to not be what I'm not good at. So what am I good at? I'm good at, playing by ear.
Yeah.
So I'm a play by ear teacher. Okay, it starts there. So now
Wow.
what types of skills will I offer? What's really simple? What are the basic? Okay, scales, chords, building chords from scale, etc. So then all of a sudden I've got a list of things that I offer. Oh, this looks a bit more professional than I thought. So it's step by step.
Hmm.
But then you then have to break the barrier, and I think this is a huge barrier to most, and it is the communication barrier.
Okay.
Quite
Talk about
often,
it.
yeah, because we can be very apologetic about our own skills.
Ah.
Comes to if we don't place value in our skills, that
Mm-hmm.
comes off really badly to other people, right? So you're trying to sell something that you can do to somebody else, but you're almost saying, what I've found a way of overcoming that is to offer something for free.
Mm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
because that way you're not charging somebody initially, but you're sharing. It's like a teaser, it's a taster.
Yeah.
So if it's piano lessons or cooking or whatever it is, you kind of do your sample portion and say, look, I'm giving out samples of this, or I'm doing sample lessons of this. Do you know anybody who would be interested in a free X, Y, and Z? Okay, now lots of people will then come for the free thing, but you've made clear that actually the first one is free, but thereafter it will cost this. And then for the number of people that you've got coming, maybe you end up with one person who actually wants to continue paying for that service. But the communication is often, how do I ask this person, usually somebody I know from the area, from your, who you talk to, how do I charge them money for something I'm offering? Whereas actually, yeah, communicating that you've got a service, get it packaged right,
Mm-hmm.
and just having like a teaser, but being very clear about what is charged and when it's charged is usually helpful to overcome that.
Yeah, I appreciate you really taking the time to break it down
Yeah.
practically
Yeah.
for us, because I think a lot of people who might be listening might feel identified with some of what we're talking about. Yeah, I've always had this mindset to maybe step out there and try to put myself out there in an entrepreneurial way, with these skill sets or whatever. But the identifying one, right? Identifying what those skill sets are, what you're good at, where exactly you're good at in that, transferring that to the communication side where, okay, now not only have you identified what you're good at and what you want to step out in faith with, for to be an entrepreneur, and but also being able to package that, being able to package it well, being able to organize yourself in a way that, okay, this is what you're presenting, and communicating that properly, and then giving us even some practical steps. Okay, maybe start with that first free sample, and then, because it doesn't just go from 0 to 100, right? You have to take each step and endure each step, because there's going to be those moments when you're being an entrepreneur where there is a lot of trial and error. Oh, that didn't really work out, and you can't just quit right when it doesn't work out the way you want it. You kind of almost have to go back to the drawing board sometimes. I want to go back to something. I might be going back way too back, but when it comes to what is being an entrepreneur, because I think we talked a lot about the people in the Bible that we can look at, who had this entrepreneur mindset. We've talked about having the desire to work, to put your skill sets to work, to make an extra income. But I remember one time, it might have been during that class that I'm quoting. I might be quoting you on that. But I remember one time hearing, um, it's not always about the extra income, but sometimes being an entrepreneur, that mindset, right? About being a problem solver. And that stuck with me because sometimes we get ahead of ourselves. Sometimes we can get ahead of ourselves. How can this translate to the income, because obviously you're thinking in that direction, providing, right? Providing for your family, providing for yourself. We got to eat, right? But many times it doesn't start there. It starts with solving a problem, right? And that's how sometimes it'll translate to that money side. Sometimes it'll translate into filling a need, solving a problem. We're in a Christian podcast, so sometimes maybe it's in a ministry, aspect where you're solving a problem in ministry, kind of like what you were saying with your website, God's Purpose for Souls, right? You saw a need, a gap, where it's like, okay, we need to maybe provide better resources, more resources to help people with Bible study, learning the word, and being able to evangelize. This
Yeah.
website will do that, and so um I just wanted to kind of talk on that and see if you had any more insight on that aspect of being a problem solver and how that comes into entrepreneurship.
Yes, absolutely. There is a term called intrapreneurship, and
Ooh.
an entrepreneur is somebody who has a job already, but they have the mindset of an entrepreneur. So they are not just limited or restricting themselves to the role that they're called to do. So you could be hired as a secretary, but actually you show yourself as an excellent liaison or negotiator, or you're doing things outside of what you've been expected to do. And I think the example that was shared in the teaching session was that of Joseph. When you think about the fact that he was a slave, okay, there's different mentalities that you can have when you're a slave. When you're a prisoner, there's different mentalities you can have when you're a prisoner. How was it possible that he was able to be told that he's in charge of the whole household, like over all the slaves, over everything? Even the man's wife recognized his authority.
Yeah.
That's because his mindset wasn't just, I've been sold and I'm here and, nobody, woe is me, etc. It's actually, do you know what? That's not the way to do that, guys. You guys are doing this way. Let me help. It should be done like this.
Mhm.
And when you offer yourself like that, it's only a matter of time. Every person who's, Potiphar owned his land. Okay. If he's seeing this stuff is going better because of Joseph's ideas, he's saying, look, I want you to tell everybody what to do, and he left him in charge there. The same thing happened in the prison. Sometimes, and we don't often talk about the battle and almost the jostling for positions, for recognitions within the church, but it happens.
Mm.
It happens a lot, and quite often people feel like, because of the public recognition, that's the only type of job that matters. When you are the leader of this or the head of that, or you have specific position. That way people can acknowledge you, you can feel great about it. But the reality is there are so many other people who are noticing issues, problems, and they are solving those problems. And that is where it starts. And the truth is those people inevitably become leaders. They don't wait until they've got the position before they start doing that. They just do it because there's a need there. I came to this church having had time backslidden, and well, prior to the church I'm pastoring, but came to LCM having been in a backslidden state. And I was a leader in the previous church I was in. And I said to myself, I don't want to be a leader in this church because there's too much responsibility, this, that, and the other. But on the first day that I was there, I saw that they needed help packing away the chairs. So I stacked away the chairs. The next week I came, I saw the sound was a bit off. So I kind of went to the sound desk and I helped, before I knew it, I was leading the youth, but I say this because, it's the need that drives the leadership,
Mm.
the need that drives the leadership. So David was an entrepreneur as well. So his job was looking after the sheep, but actually he was wrestling lions and bears.
Right. Right.
And the reality of him wrestling the lions and bears meant that he was practicing being a warrior. So when the time arose for him to be a warrior, he was ready, to the point where he rejected the normal warrior's garments. He's like, you know, I haven't proved this, but I
Yeah.
know what I have proved. And this is what will happen. Those people who pick up the rubbish in church, those people who clean the toilets in church, those people who open the door, they're not an usher, but they open the door for somebody else. Those people who check in on that person who wasn't at church, or those people who just care for that person who was sick, or, you know, that type of mindset. There's an issue here, there's a gap here, there's a problem. What can we do to help solve it? They inevitably, like Joseph, become the person that's asked, like Daniel, be the person that's asked, yeah, here's the ring, here's the robe, lead.
Mhm. Yeah.
Man,
So many good
that's really
things.
good. And that makes me, but
Yeah.
that brings me back to Paul being a tent maker, and it never really says why, but I think it just maybe made sense. It's like maybe that's what people
That
needed.
was the need, maybe.
People needed tents, and so he just
I
kind
I
of.
think I think I haven't done too much in-depth study into this, but I think it was linked to the Feast of Booths as well. I think that there was specific time, the Feast of Tabernacles, where they would come together. You know, it's talks
Mm,
about in Zechariah, etc. You know, everyone would come together and celebrate Feast of Tabernacles, but they had to erect those things, and this
yeah.
was something that God set up because they had traveled through the wilderness, so they would follow the tabernacle. And when the the tabernacle was set, you know, they would set up camp and they would
Hmm.
build those tents and they would live in tents. And then when it was time to move, they would move. And that was a feast that was celebrated off, you know, Feast of Tabernacles. So he would build those along with people like Priscilla and Aquila, who he met, you know, and even that alliance helped towards the salvation of Apollos, which led to the salvation of those Jews, 12 disciples who were in Ephesus as well, because Apollos had just come from Ephesus. You know, he was preaching there the baptism of John the Baptist, you know. So lo and behold, Paul says, yeah, let me go there. But it wasn't just tent making. It was there was a purpose there. There was a need, I
Yeah.
believe, and they were fulfilling that need.
Mhm.
I think you know, over here we have The Apprentice, and Lord Sugar says, "Smell what sells." I think it's this idea of at that season, that's what's needed. So that's what I'm going to do.
I get so excited, by the way, about this conversation too, because this is one of those things that I feel like I've always felt that just what did you call it? Not entrepreneurship, but
Entrepreneur.
entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Is that what you called it? Yeah. Yeah. I've always felt like that. And the reason I like this conversation just gets me so worked up is because I feel so seen when we talk about this, because I've always been that person to just see different needs, but then also sometimes it can be overwhelming because I'm like, Jeanette, you just need to focus on one thing, you're trying to do all these different things. But I sometimes we put ourselves in these boxes, right? Even through the journey. And you mentioned it earlier. Sometimes other people see, something you could be doing that you don't maybe even see for yourself. And it reminded me of, all the years that I spent in the UK. I think you would know this, brother OC, that I got very involved in the area of media and tech
Mm,
within the church, sector of things, because I saw a need, because I started helping in that need, and then
mm,
eventually it just kind of grew, right?
mm,
And I think for a long time, I love media, I love tech, I love doing those things. I still do those things. But I think for a long time I saw that as like almost the only thing I could do. But I also enjoyed these other areas, right? These other things. And one of those things has been like cooking, for example. But a lot of people maybe that don't know me on that interpersonal level wouldn't know that, right? That I love to cook, and I love sharing my like cultural like food, with people, right? And
Yeah.
so that's something I've always done, but I haven't really put out there, right? And recently, since moving to Japan, we started cooking for people and started inviting them over for food and things like that. Long story short, that has led to someone trying our food and saying, "You need to teach a cooking class."
Right.
And they got me connected with someone in the city, a
Yes.
city I just moved to less than half a year ago or so, to
Mm.
teach a international cooking class for the city, you know? And it's just like I look back now and I'm like, you know, that was one of those examples where I could say it really did take someone else saying to me, "You should
Yes.
do this. You know,
Mhm.
you're good at this. You should do this." Because I maybe didn't think of that for myself, you know?
Mm.
But now it's something that, you know, really we're using in the terms of ministry and community, and who knows, you know, what's going to come out of that. But it just, as we were having this conversation, I was feeling identified. So
Yeah.
I hope that whoever's listening can also maybe feel that sense of, oh, maybe this could be me with this
Mm.
thing, you know?
Yeah.
And one thing I enjoy about this conversation too is how we're talking about this topic of entrepreneurship in the lines of faith. Not everyone who's an entrepreneur has, you know, faith, is a Christian, or, you know, lets that guide them. But in this conversation, you know, we are Christian, and so we do have faith, which is a huge part of our lives. You know, so I wanted to ask you, for those, see, like, how has faith shaped, like, I know we've basically been talking about this the whole time, but um in terms of when you have taken that step out in faith, because it is a step in faith regardless if you have faith or not. When you're going to start a new business, start a new venture, you're really putting yourself out there. You're really taking a big risk. You know, some would call it risk, maybe we call it a leap of faith, you know. But how has your Christian faith played a role into that, when you've made those steps yourself?
Yes, that's a very, very good question because, and first of all, let me go back to what you said about the cooking. I love that, and I
Yeah.
would like to encourage anybody to not be boxed in by
Mm,
other people's viewpoints. Um, people will call it how they see it, and if they see you always doing a thing, they
mhm.
don't mean bad by
Yeah.
expecting you to do that thing. But sometimes, yes, there is a bit of a pull, an itch, sometimes a calling to do something else. And I think one practical thing in transition would be delegation. You have to
Mm-hmm.
replace you in what you're doing. If it only relies on you, you'll be doing it forever.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
if you get other people to step in, train them up, and train them to train others, then you know it doesn't die with the people that you've left it with. It will
Mm,
continue on, and then it
yeah.
will free you up to rinse and repeat, but in a different area. And it's perfectly fine to have many different many different things. But no, yes, the question that you asked in terms of faith, what tends to happen when people venture out into doing business is there is an expected way to conduct yourself, there's an expected way to communicate, there's an expected way that you um, should price your goods. There's an expected way that there's so many things that are just kind of standard and run of the mill. And there are, what that does is it presents plenty of opportunities to walk by faith.
Yeah.
Mm.
Us. Some of those standard things are at direct opposition to my walk with God.
Mm,
So the ways in which people would, some things could be slightly deceitful, but it gives the edge in business. Some things could be disingenuous, but it gives the edge in business.
Mm. Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
ways
Yeah.
that people just communicate to force through an issue because you have to be coercive. Everybody's like that.
mm,
Actually, if you're finding yourself not being like Jesus, not being even like Jesus' cousin or anybody close to Jesus, then, you know, that's not a good thing. It's not about
right.
compromise. It's not about
Yeah.
saying it's kind of like I'm kind of like Christ. There's plenty of
Mhm.
people out there in the world that are like that, but we need to know who we are in Christ first and foremost.
Yeah.
We need to know what it is that we're aiming to do. And we need to walk by faith. So there are certain decisions that you would make that, yes, maybe it doesn't look like the best business decision. Maybe it doesn't give you the best margin or the best amount of money. And sometimes it's nothing to do with the money. Sometimes it's the relationships. Oh,
Yeah.
in order to get favor with this person, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Or, we need to walk by faith. And, I think we we can't live in such a way that is just focused on the natural. The scripture says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, spiritual wickedness, etc.
Hmm.
That is more true than we often realize. So quite often you're having a normal communication with somebody who is linked to the business, but actually it isn't about the words you say that will give you favor. And it's not about the words they've said back that means the door is closed.
Yeah.
But actually, when we've spent time on our knees in prayer and we've given it to God, God gives us the words to say.
Right.
But also, when somebody has closed a door and told you, I'm going to tell everybody in this business never to do business with you, and you've got on your knees and prayed, and you've dealt with that spirit, and you've dealt with all the spirits that are related, there is nothing closed to you. And actually, God opens doors. So
Yes, he
it
does.
is. There's so much of this that is by faith, but we have to not enter this like everybody else. We're not like everybody else.
Right.
We are the salt of the earth. We're kings and priests. We need to walk and move as such. And by
Yeah.
the grace of God, God will work out the numbers and sort out the bank account, and we
Yeah.
can tithe accordingly.
Yeah. Wow. Like, you know, I asked that question from the perspective of, that risk taking or that faith, but you just brought a whole nother
Yeah.
aspect to it too, which is, just who we are in Christ and through the business world. There can be what kept coming to mind as you're saying this is don't lose your identity as a Christian through it,
Mm.
right? Because there are, I mean, you look online nowadays, there's so many resources, which is good, right? About how to uh learn the world of business, and so many things on YouTube and short courses and all this
Yeah.
stuff about how to learn how to be a good business person, right? And it'll teach you all of these skills, all of these negotiating tactics, all of these things. But in that, is our we are Christian first, and our character of as a Christian, like you said, you're trying to be Christ-like, and so in some of that, just like anything, there might be some moments in which it'll be challenging because actually, you know, the business world might teach me I have to do this. But
Mm.
that goes against my ethics as a Christian,
Right.
right? My morals as a Christian. And so I need to be true to God first. And the
Yes,
thing is that we know that having the favor of God, like you said, even if man says no to you, God says yes. God's in control, right? God's gonna open a door.
absolutely. There are certain things that many people in the business world would take from scriptures, directly from scriptures, and teach them as business principles. Okay,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So true.
quite often we can get caught up in the way that they present it. Okay. But what I often tell people is there is a very big difference between the way in which they conducted themselves around the Tower of Babel, okay, which God Himself said, nothing shall be withheld from them. They were unified, they had a vision. I mean, if you look into the writings of Josephus, you realize the coercion that was involved there, etc., the fear, the tyranny. But the bottom line was God had to come and stop that. Okay. So there's principles in there that you can take out as a business person and teach and say, this is the way to get it done.
Mm,
But it's not just about getting it done.
mhm,
Yeah.
So what I share with people is that actually, when you look at Philippians 2, 12 and 13, Paul is commending them. And at the end of the verse 12, he says, Now, therefore, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling.
Right.
Verse 13 says, for it is God that works in both to will and to do of his good pleasure. So actually, in terms of what it is that we're trying to do, in terms of the methods that we're trying to do, actually, it needs to be as a result of us working out our salvation with fear and trembling, trying to do things God's way, that God gives us the idea. The amount of business ideas and things that I've had, I've sat back because I know it's not me. I know that is not me. I'd never in a month of Sundays could I have come up with such ideas, but I know it's God. And this is what God said. There's two things from that verse 13. It says, God works in you both to have the idea, that's the will,
Mm.
and the anointing, the ability to
To-
do that thing. So God will put the idea and he'll give you the anointing, and then we get it done. But that comes through us wanting to do God's will rather than wanting to get the business done, etc.
Right. Right.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah.
I'm about to run in circles in this Takami room.
It's interesting to be described in that way. I didn't know I had an entrepreneurial background until today.
Really?
That's hilarious.
That's how that's how we've seen
Yeah,
you. Like, it's
that's what I'm
not.
saying.
Yeah,
You,
it's you carry yourself
Mhm.
in a way where you like you said, like you've shared it, you're a problem solver and you see a need. You share that, and but you also s- carry it out and see things through.
Mm,
That I think those are aspects of being an entrepreneur, as you've said. And so,
so,
yeah, and in addition to being a pastor and a spiritual leader, like you're an entrepreneur, man. I don't know how. I'm surprised that
you
you
don't
don't
see
see
yourself that way. Yeah, because I
it.
mean, I've seen you like that, like I said, in so many different aspects. Like when you were deep in youth ministry, I saw how you would do that. You would start things, um even following you like on social media and seeing all the stuff you're doing also with your career, and the uh, just the different projects that you would launch, it's like, to me, that was just, you were an entrepreneur, you were starting stuff and filling needs and problem solving in that sense. And so
so,
yeah.
So what led you to start the
Yeah.
church that you
yeah,
started?
so my wife and I, we had a cell group, and the cell group being in Essex and our mother church being in Stratford, which is East London, it was difficult for the members to get to Stratford. And yes, in seeing that need, we had the cell group for a year and a half, 2 years before we started the church. So we felt that we need to really find a, and this is again one of those situations where, my wife and I, we talk a lot, and she would look at the situation and say, look, we need to find a place right now. I would look at my schedule and say, I don't know how I'm going to be able to do pastor a church. Well, because keep in mind all the leadership roles I had at the mother
Yeah.
church, etc.
Hmm.
To think about having additional roles on top of that at that point in time, my head, I thought my head was going to explode. But it's that encouragement, it's that different point of view where she's like, no, we need to do this, and something happened actually that tipped me over, which was a couple that we'd reached out to, we'd done Bible studies with. Um, they were coming along to Stratford, but then it was too much for them, and they ended up going to a different church, a non-apostolic church, and that really was just like, if we did have something in the area, that might not have had to have happened, So that really kind of pushed me. I'm like, right, okay, look, let's just do this again by faith. I didn't know where the time would come from, but you know, when we found the venue, which was my son's secondary school, actually. Um,
Mhm.
and my youngest daughter's gymnastics club is at that same place.
Okay.
Um, we, in terms of the question around entrepreneurship, it was just this idea of considering beyond the here and now. I don't think I've ever seen the work as only a startup.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've ever seen it that way, in the way that we've prayed, in the way that we've, just and I'm blessed to be able to do things like build a website, etc., and design the logo. So a lot of things were done for a bigger church than a small little group that meets in a house.
Yeah.
But just thinking beyond the here and now, thinking in terms of the vision. So we've got a vision statement, we've got a lot of different things that are kind of, this is what we want it to be going forward. So there's so many things that could change in terms of the time we meet, the days that we meet, and a lot of different things that are quite fluid, and we're learning. We don't know the first thing about starting a church. We started from scratch, and it was such a blessing to have both of you come and surprise us that time and visit. I'm not sure how long we were going for. I think it was only a few weeks when you came, but it was a blessing. You've seen that work,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we really did. It feels like we're still starting, to be honest. I can't really say, I'm talking almost in hindsight, but it feels like we're still just starting. It's coming up to, I guess, 10 or so months of doing it, but
Yeah.
in its infancy, which it is, the kind of perspective of how we're reaching people beyond the here and now. What is the expectation at different levels, in terms of where we want people to be, and even seeing the gifting and calling in people who have come just for this very short period of time. I think a lot of those things are potentially from this idea of kind of entrepreneurship and this mindset, I guess, of entrepreneurship. So I don't know if that answers the question, but they're the things that come to mind.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you for sharing. And for those who are listening, are you guys online? You mentioned having a website and things like that. Is there a way that if someone can find your church?
Yes, docupc.com is the website. The
DLC.
church is called Disciples of Christ Fellowship. docupc.com will find the website. A very simple website at the moment, but it's got the map on there as to where we are. And yes, always welcome any kind of person who wants to come along. All
Awesome.
of it.
Thank you. Thank you.
There's a question that we ask every episode at the end, and that question is, what can the person listening to this podcast episode do to become a better global Christian?
I would encourage people to listen and be interested in others. Um, People have a story to tell,
Mhm.
and quite often there's limited space for people to tell their story.
Mm.
And when you hear people's stories, you learn a little bit about their culture. You learn a bit about, and when I say culture, I don't just mean kind of their national heritage, etc., but even their family culture. The way in which they did things in their family growing up, or just the different experience they have. And the reason why that's important is because we can't reach people as Christians unless they feel that we care.
Mm.
And people don't know that you care unless you've taken the time to actually hear them, hear their heart. So
Yeah.
that's something that I would encourage people to do. I can hear my wife saying, "Yeah, you need to do it too." I do. I try.
The Uttermost podcast is made for the Christian that wants to be global and the person who wants to understand Christianity across the world. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you for listening to the Uttermost podcast, the bridge between you and the ends of the earth. And remember, the end of the bridge is closer than you think. Now go and be a witness.